Hi, Zizaran here with another video about No Rest for the Wicked, and this is a sponsored video by Moon Studios and Private Division. And in this, I'm going to be interviewing two of the founders of No Rest for the Wicked, and they have made such games as Ori and the Blind Forest, etc., and are now making a very different game, a little bit like Dark Souls, a little bit like ARPGs. It's very interesting and pretty based interview with them. So hopefully you'll like it. If you like what you see, you can get your copy in the link down below. But either way, enjoy, and hopefully you like the way I did the interview. I figured what better way to start but with you introducing yourselves and telling me a little bit about what you do on the company.
I'll start. I'm Thomas Mahler. I'm the game director. I'm doing directing, right? I'm the main, like the head designer basically of the game, and basically laying out the direction of where everything is heading.
Yeah.
Awesome.
My name is Gennadiy. I'm the other co-founder, and I do everything tech related, also a little bit of tech art, lots of production, also helping on the assets recently, all of the trailers and reels and on all of that kind of stuff, and just really passionate about the product and making everything as polished and juicy and satisfying. And, you know, when you have the GIP system, you cut stuff, I think that's the kind of thing I really thrive on. So you'll see more of them.
Very cool. I mean, like the graphics are immaculate. Like that's what people were talking about a lot, and they were even better than the last time I played. Performance seems better, so like really good job on that. It's a very cool art style.
I mean, we always had an amazing art team, right? You already saw this on the Ori games and so on. We value that a lot, that our games look very unique, right? Like our thing is always that even if you see a small thumbnail of our games, that you can immediately tell, oh, this is a Moon Studios game. So yeah, we just keep that going, and we kind of like swim against the tide a little bit with that, right? Where everybody is doing like high polygonal stuff and so on. We always make sure everything looks painted, you know, and like a painting comes to life.
It's very cool. I did want to ask you about that. This is a very different style of game from Ori. So like when I first heard about this, I was like, very surprised. My wife is a big fan of Ori, so yeah, very different. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, it's a big segue almost, right? Big difference. Like, what was the decision making there?
It started basically with us. Like we always saw Ori as our Mario because it was very platforming based and so on, right? And then back in like 2016, I think it was, I had this whole feeling of like, man, what if, you know, we delivered Ori now? What if Moon Studios as a next game would make Zelda, right? So we would follow the same trajectory as Nintendo did back in 85, 86. And so I started making this little prototype that was a top-down action adventure thing, right? And then at some point we were like, no, let's fucking create the coolest RPG we could imagine.
2015, actually. That was 2015.
Oh yeah, December 2015. Yeah.
We actually pitched this project at DICE Awards in the hotel in Las Vegas. While we were nominated, I think Ori took like 3 awards, which was incredible. Ori and the Blind Forest. And while we were just preparing for that big evening, having no idea if we would win anything, we were already showing this project to see if there was any interest with all kinds of publishers.
Very cool. That is a very cool. So people have been asking me, like, is this an ARPG? Is it like Dark Souls? And I've been like, well, it's kind of like its own thing. It's almost like a new genre of game.
Thank you. Thank you. Finally.
But like, that's what I want to ask you about. Like, what type of games like inspired this? Because it's like, it's so much from like other styles. It's so different. It's a little bit Dark Souls. It's a little bit ARPGs with like the itemizations, the camera. Yeah.
Well, the way it started is I loved playing Diablo 2 in the early 2000s, right? And was like, oh my God, imagine what, like if this game is already that, right? Imagine what kind of ARPGs we'd be playing 10 years down the line or 15 years down the line and so on, right? And to me, I didn't see the advancements that I wanted to see in the genre, right? So we always kind of like thought, yeah, but if they do Diablo 3 or Diablo 4, they might blow it out of proportion, right? And we felt like that didn't really happen. Like there were so many ideas that we had for where we want to see the genre heading that we just said at some point, screw it, we'll do it ourselves. You know, we made Ori now. Now we want to tackle an ARPG as the next thing. And then we completely opened up the whole thing, right? Like, so what can we do in that genre that... So what?
only took 7 years from that point in time of like, fuck it, let's do our own ARPG. But here
Yeah,
we are.
like making an ARPG is stupid hard. Like it's really complex.
Who knew?
But
Making video games.
that was the whole idea, that we just basically look at, that we don't just look at, hey, let's make another Diablo clone, right? But that we look at, no, so let's start from scratch, right? Like how can you really improve that genre? And it started with combat, right? Do you really still do the point and click combat? Or do you follow the same thing where it's like everything explodes on screen as fast as possible and so on? And we thought, no, like there's Monster Hunter and Dark Souls. They do more the kind of combat that we like, right? Where it's like very reactive and you have to think and it's very strategical and so on. So it was that. Then we wanted multiplayer to be completely crazy, and that is still coming, right? Like that whole multiplayer update is still coming. We wanted that to be on a completely different level than what you typically see in a Diablo style game or in Souls and so on. We wanted to introduce crazy shit in ARPGs like housing and farming and all of that, right? So that stuff, like I think, yes, it is very much its own thing. And it's cool that people see that now, right? Because there was always this huge discussion in the team, right? Like, can we make all of this fit together? But I think we can. And I think, like the seeds are already laid now.
Absolutely. And it does definitely have a bit of a Dark Souls feel to it as well. What I particularly like there is, well, this game made me wish Dark Souls had this camera angle. Because for me, like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, I'm fighting a boss and suddenly the camera is like zoomed into my back and I can't see the boss anymore. And I'm like, what
And
is
you only see your
happening?
butt.
Yeah, I'm like, this is really frustrating. So I really like that. What were like the favorite elements of games like Dark Souls that you wanted to like have?
I think we should actually zoom in on the whole camera topic if you'd like, because I do think that there is quite a bit of actual effort that's going on behind the scenes. Because if you would have just kept the camera top down and static, I don't think you would have gotten the same feel. Because we always have this thing where what you do get in Dark Souls when you have this third person camera perspective is it's extremely immersive, right? Everything feels big. The creatures, the enemies, the bosses, they feel larger than life.
Yeah.
Your character actions are very, very clear, in terms of the animation and everything, because your character is huge on screen. But then you cannot do these crazy dashes, right? Like if you want to just dash back like crazy, then you would just basically go into the camera, right? It would be very jarring. Or if you dash forward, or just even controlling the camera all the time, that takes a lot of your thumb, constantly being engaged with that, which makes the control scheme a lot more complicated. And you just don't want to do it. So our camera is kind of like a blend where it's not going to lower itself as low as Dark Souls, but it's also not going to be static and sort of this isometric perspective, because that feels boring. So we very quickly felt that the camera is actually an invisible actor that you just don't think about, but it's constantly there to emphasize the action. So what it will do, it will always frame the action in a very, very intelligent way, where if you're fighting something, it zooms in. If you're pulling back, it's going to zoom out, and it will always try to frame the action in a way that's really immersive and readable. And I really love that, because we had a really big debate in the team if we should even do this. I mean, Thomas likes everything zoomed out like it's a miniature on screen. I don't know why, maybe because he's too tall and it's just used to see the world that way. But, it is super fun that nobody complains about this, that we've nailed this camera, that it just does what it needs to do and you don't have to control it. And I think that's a big achievement of our gameplay tech team.
It's down to feeling as well, right? Like if you play a Dark Souls game and you play Artorias or any of the bosses, right? Like you always have this thing of like, man, they do these really cool moves, like they do these somersaults and dash forward and all of that, right? And you as a player, you're like hitting things, like because you can't do those moves, right? So, and what happened once we actually did the whole camera thing was that, well, your thumb is not the analog stick anymore. You don't have to move your mouse around to kind of like just move the camera, right? So you can do these crazy rune attacks and all of the stuff where it's like, oh my god, I can, throw my my blade forward and then get teleported, or jump into the air and like do all of those crazy things that would be much harder to do if the camera is like constantly up in your butt, basically.
Yeah. And did you try any other like different camera angles before you landed on this one?
No, it was always like from the start we were like, no, we'll do top-down camera because it's just for playability, right? To see where the enemies are and for those kind of things that we wanted to do, it was always like, even the prototype back then was a top-down thing.
Yeah. Well, we do have a fun experiment in the team, which is a first-person mode, and it's very broken and very cool looking. So
That sounds super interesting. Wow. Next we'll have VR, right?
Which is actually something we did consider, but we were thinking
Oh,
about it more like a top down, VR experience.
oh wow. Interesting. I was just
Yeah,
joking about
we had a mode at some point, like we had that implemented actually at some point in our prototype, in one of the earlier prototypes, where it's like the VR thing was almost like looking down at the table and you could look up and see the other areas in the distance and so on. It was
Oh
pretty
wow.
cool, but yeah.
That's
We'll
so
see.
interesting.
We can still do that.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. And so we just had the big Crucible update that just released. I'd love to hear you just talk about a little bit about the new Crucible because it's very different from the last time I played with the roguelike mechanic, which was very like surface level before, now being like a real
Mhm.
roguelike mechanic. So yeah, tell me a little bit about the update.
Yeah, well, maybe before we go, I would actually love to hear from you. What did you think?
So
That you've played for a little
the
bit.
first time I played it, I was like the campaign was fun. I liked the roguelike thing, although the it felt slightly different, but last time it felt like, at least, I don't know if this is the case, but it felt like there was like scaling. Like if I leveled, the monsters got harder too. So I never felt like I was really gaining any power. That feels different now as well. Plus, I really like that you can like already with just like an hour of trying the new one, I was finding like several like broken combos. Like, oh my god, this leech is so OP. Now I want to like look for that every time. I accidentally like bricked my build by getting like too little stamina regen. And I was like, oh no, I can't attack this boss anymore. Like this is a terrible mistake. So that adds a really, really like cool element to it.
I think you
That's
should do
always what we're
more of
trying to
those.
do, right? Like with any of the effects that we do and so on, a lot of times in ARPGs, what I'm seeing is like, oh, gain 0.5% more of this or that, right? And we always try to err more on the side of, no, let's give the player a lot of power because you die easily anyway. Like I just watched your live stream with the whole lifesteal thing, right? But then you kind of figure out, oh shit, if I just go down the health tree, right, and I just get myself health and health and health, I might not have the most balanced build for the end boss, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So you kind of like have to balance it. You kind of have to understand the mode. The other advice I would give you, right, is that there's the Seneschal, which you met, where you were scared that it's a boss. It's not. It's just a vendor, right? And you can actually exalt your weapons there, so you can
Yeah.
get further upgrades than you were till now, right? And that is actually super powerful.
Yeah.
So it just really the big thing about the Crucible now, like even for the launch, we just couldn't get it done, right? We always wanted to add a mode that is inspired by Diablo 1, basically, right? What I loved about Diablo 1 was just the tightness of like, oh, you're in Tristram, and then you just have to go 15 levels down, right? How hard can that be, right? And it's like, that's the entire game. And we thought, man, wouldn't that be great for an end game, like one end game mode being that, where it's just, hey, here's play your ARPG, right? Then you get towards the end game, and then it's like, okay, the end game is roguelike, right? Or roguelite, basically. And I thought that would always be really fun. That's just one of the things that we're planning for end game. But it's one of the cool ones because with roguelites, like people can spend hundreds of hours and like really get really good at the game and so on and just enjoy the shit out of it by just building a build on top of your build. And what a fucking balancing nightmare that was now. So,
I bet.
but
I was
yeah.
gonna ask you actually. Like, I noticed that you took both XP and loot out of the roguelike. Is that something you're
Well,
gonna
we have
experiment?
we have a discussion about that in the team still. We'll see. We'll
That's what I was
see.
gonna ask because I was like, I do quite like that you were maybe not leveling up, but at least loot, like getting because now I'm guessing that I wasn't able to kill the boss, but like what happens when you kill the boss? Like what kind of reward do you get?
You still get the loot, right? So you still get all these, tier 3 rewards and so on. So you still get that. But there's a lot of stuff coming. We can't just plan for what is in the game right now,
Yeah,
right? We
for
also
sure.
have to plan already for what is coming now very soon, right? Like, and so this is the first move, basically. Like, we're not anywhere close to done with No Rest for the Wicked, right? There's so much coming, and so everything gets prepared for what's to come.
How much
Yeah, I think
larger
that
do you think the Crucible is gonna be?
we still have a few things that actually didn't even make it into this one. So there's
Oh wow.
Yeah.
probably going to be Crucible Part 2 at some point.
So,
Probably.
so the cool thing that I love about No Rest for the Wicked in general. Sorry, Gennadiy, I don't know if did I interrupt you because we have a bit of lag there.
It's all right.
Okay. So, I mean, the cool thing the thing that I love about No Rest for the Wicked in general, right, is that it's almost like multiple games in one, right? So
Mhm.
we could have gone and like made a roguelite thing, right? Or we could have gone and just made an ARPG, right? But we can combine those things, and in this one world, right, where you basically give people a forever game, and that's the thing that we ultimately really, really enjoy. With the Crucible, for example, I don't know if we should tease this now, right? But there are other statues. Like right now, you only have this one statue, this one pedestal that you can interact with.
Yeah.
But there are others, right? And now you can kind of like imagine, okay, there's way more stuff coming than just what you played right now.
Very cool.
Well, also we love to do this with the community. Like this is the whole thing with early access. This is why we wanted to do this. Is that you can be extremely quick with just trying things, right? And seeing like, oh, this is cool. Okay, let's do more of that. Let's try this idea. Let's try that idea. And I think the whole snackable, we call it snackable experience with the Crucible is that you can spend 10 minutes, right, on your break, on your Steam Deck. Hopefully now, it performs really well, so you can really enjoy that at 50 to 60 frames per second. And it's just cool. You don't have to be very committed. It's like, oh, I'm going to do a big run in the overworld or do this or that. You can just have this snackable fun. And every single time you do a run, it's different. Every single time it feels different. It looks different. You have different enemies. The challenge varies. Everything just feels unpredictable in the experience you're going to get. And I think there's just something different about that versus the overworld, and different in a way that's addictive, right? You go like, okay, I want to try another one because I'm not sure what I'm going to get.
Yeah.
Why you don't get all of the loot yet or the XP for that, I think that is something we will still be discussing. Thomas is very certain he's not, it breaks all the designs. But I think this is part of early access, is to really explore what we could do and do the right thing by the product, right? It's really not.
I really appreciate the community in general, right? Like the whole thing about early access. And I think that just speaks to the heart of ARPGs, right? Like we look at what all these ARPG fans want, right? And just the whole idea that we can put something out there, even if it's not like final packaged product or something, right? That they play it, they give us a ton of feedback, and we can adjust things and perfect things based on that. With the Ori games, we always had, on this date, it needs to be final and perfect, right? But it's like, but what if we could squeeze 5% more fun out of it or 10% more fun out of it, right? And I think that's just kind of like in our DNA, that just perfecting games and then having this back and forth with the community is just the best.
And I think we have to be vulnerable a little bit, right? Even today, we had this debate in the team of like, oh, there were a few things we still wanted to fix. And, we're perfectionists at heart. And we're like, should we delay the update? Or should we stick to the time, right? And there's always that tension. And today we decided, no, we're shipping on time. This is the date, this is the time. And if something's off, we will just hot patch this and we will react, right? And I think there's that vulnerability that I think as a developer you have to have when you're doing early access, when you are building something with a community.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I always really appreciate it when devs are a little bit humble. It's like, oh, like this didn't go after plan. This is what we're going to do instead. Just talk to your community, and people generally appreciate that quite a lot, I think.
We love that a lot. It's just the best, right? That you like. I have literally hundreds of people adding me on Discord constantly, right? And just telling me, hey, can you guys add this or add that and so on. And I always, like, when I was younger, right, like it would have been my dream to kind of like talk to the people at Blizzard who make Diablo 2 or something, right? And I think that's just cool, talking to the folks who actually play the game, who enjoy it, who have their own ideas and dreams and so on. And then you're like, it feels good to just tell them, yes, that stuff is coming, wait for it.
Awesome. And speaking of what's coming, multiplayer is coming next, and I have a lot of questions about multiplayer. How are you guys going to approach things like an economy and trading and even like loot distribution?
Yeah, so we went through that stuff a lot, right? Like we started with loot that was shared, right? But then we ultimately went to first come, first serve, because we really like it when there is discussion happening, right? When it's like not everybody like, hey, I killed this boss and like 4 times the same weapon drops and everybody has it now, right? No, there should in multiplayer, what we want to do to a large degree is this whole thing of like, I really have to communicate with others, right? And it's a tough choice, and it's this whole, it's this whole, hey, who buys a house, for example, right? In multiplayer, like the immediate thing is, who can afford the coolest place, in Sacrament and so on, right? So we went with that. And then economy-wise, we're also doing that thing where we just want to allow for trading, right? Like there's all this, hey, in ARPGs, a lot of times it gets limited and so on, right? And we just, fuck it, let's just make it all completely free. Because that's, if people like that really gives it that whole thing of like items being valuable and so on, right? And just it feeling really good that, you can trade your stuff. So that's the direction that we're heading into.
I think that the important thing for people to know is that, while we haven't shipped this yet, everything we've done over the last 7 years was built for multiplayer, co-op, and PvP from the ground up. Like literally every single thing that is in the game supports that. And our networking model, which we will talk about a lot, it's basically built for fighting games, but it's scaled to a 3D action RPG. So the input response, the lack of rubber banding or lag is going to be something that I think a lot of people will be very surprised by, because this game is networked very differently than any other game in this genre. As Thomas was saying, in Dark Souls or whatever, it's like it always felt like the multiplayer is a second, sort of second-class citizen. Here, multiplayer is the first-class citizen. Everything is designed and built for it. So, when are we going to ship this? We're working on a big roadmap update, and we're still learning a lot from, what we've done with the launch and how we want to do this. Of course, it's the most requested feature, and it's something that everybody wants to see as soon as possible. But I think for us, it's really important to nail not just a particular update that people really want, but the entire arc of early access that leads us to 1.0. It has to be one story that makes sense, right? So we cannot just focus on specific things. We have to tell a cohesive story, and maybe there are things we still need to do before multiplayer can really work or really work well. Or maybe we will decide to shift multiplayer to earlier and just make sure we can design for that and get the input earlier. So this is the beauty of early access. At some point, we don't quite know. We're still debating. We're still thinking about it. But what we do, we'll do it in the right way.
Let me say one thing. So regarding multiplayer, what we want to do there is just like from the start, we kind of like set out to do it differently than how a Diablo or Dark Souls have done it. Because usually what you have is, hey, I can host a game, and then some other player joins, and then we play for a little bit together, right? But it's never been really a cohesive thing, right? So our multiplayer works more in the way that you share a realm together, and then you have that feeling of like, hey, oh my God, Sis did these Crucible runs the whole night, and he unlocked these things, right? Whereas your buddy actually did another thing, and you see those upgrades in Sacrament, and then you just play, right? So it's almost like a mini MMORPG in that sense, right? You just play, and you see your buddy like, oh my God, he's out there fishing, and like it's just that kind of like believable open world is what we're looking for.
So that will sort of give like a big feeling of like, basically like if I had a Valheim server with a friend of mine and he's progressing the world while oh, that's so cool. I didn't think it was going to be anything like that at all.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going for. So that you could wake up in the morning, just open up the game, right, and go, oh my God, James did all of that stuff now, and he has a better house than me now. Well, that's not going to happen, right? And you see that even if he's offline. So that also means that if the host goes offline, right, it doesn't matter, right, because the realm is still there. And you just share that together, right? So that feeling of like, it's almost like a family, right? Where it's like, hey, you just share that thing together, and like everybody contributes to it. That's why when you contribute materials to vendors or so on, right, it says contribute instead of just adding it, because everybody kind of like has to share.
Now, I do see one issue with this that I would love to hear your thoughts on. Like, how is it going to work with like at the moment when you're progressing the world and things, it feels like the world scales up a little bit, becomes a little bit more difficult. What happens if I'm playing 4 hours a day, but my friend Steel Mage, he's playing 20 hours a day? Suddenly the world is like really difficult. Am I going to get screwed by that and you have to communicate with your friends, or are you going to have some sort of like limit on the scaling?
To some degree. So you can screw your buddy over if you extensively play way more than him, right? But I think what will happen ultimately is that people will have their single player realms just like they do right now, and then they'll have another realm where they play multiplayer, right? Yeah. And then it's almost like a D&D session, right? Where it's like you don't play D&D if 2 of your buddies are not there or something, right? True. You play it together. And generally speaking, we don't want to put kind of like these arbitrary limits and so on people, right? Like it's just like hey, if people want to play a certain way, let's allow them to play that way, right? And you said this thing before about like, hey, your wife played Ori and so on, right? Like that's the kind of thing that we're really interested in, right? That Wicked could ultimately become this kind of game because you already have housing in Wicked and so on, right? We're also adding a farming update and so on. We always wanted to do this thing where it's like, well, if somebody wants to be just the merchant of the town or the lumberjack of the town or something, right? That you can live out that role-playing fantasy, whereas somebody else might just go and slash monsters and so on, right? So that's also a really big thing that we want to accomplish, even to the point where it's like, hey, you could buy a house, but turn it into a shop by just having these little stalls outside and like, hey, here's the stuff that I'm selling, right? And I'll give it a price. And then everybody else on the realm just sees that price, right? And you essentially turned yourself into a merchant.
Very cool. Wow, there's like so many different features. I'm very excited to hear that. I did have a question again about multiplayer, which I feel like is almost pre-answered. But will all the content in the game be accessible in multiplayer, or will there be some things that will be like you can only do when you're alone?
I think it's just the prologue maybe that will be locked off. So the first tutorial section, everything else is shared.
Cool.
Yep, you can just do everything together.
Um,
Well, no, that's the nice thing, right? Like one person could be in this area, the other person could be in this area, and then you randomly just meet because the realm is always there.
yeah. How often do you see the game like having new seasons or wipes and stuff like that once it's out of early access?
Yeah, so that's something that we're still discussing right now. There's a lot of feedback coming in from even like realm modifiers and that kind of thing, right? And like, hey, how do people want to play the game and so on? We discussed seasons at the start. At the start, I was a little bit against that, right? Because of this whole wipe thing. The whole, hey, you build up your town and then wait, do I have to do that every single time and so on, right? But it is a lot of fun to kind of like just play the game again. Like, especially now with this update, I think it would be a lot of fun for a lot of people. Like, just start a new character on a new realm, right? And see all the things that we improved and so on. Because if you already have a maxed out character, you might not see quite a few of the things that we added now and so on, right? So it's something that we're actively discussing. We're not 100% yet on exactly, how do we want to go about this? Yeah, and we'll see, right? Like we'll communicate with everybody once we know for sure.
I think sometimes people ask questions and they want to know specific answers to specific questions. Like, will there ever be a wipe? Will there be a wipe in early access? Will there be a wipe in 1.0? Are you going to do seasons this way? Are you going to do expansions? All of this. And I think that the answer is, of course, we don't want to do wipes, right? That is a disruptive thing. There are reasons to do wipes. But throughout early access, we try to do as little as possible of that. But the more important thing, I think, for us to develop with the community is this trust of us knowing how to shepherd this project throughout this process of early access and then beyond. Yeah. And what is really important for us is to make the right decisions by the product, right? So the North Star isn't, okay, we're not going to ever do wipes, right? Or we're not going to do this, or we're going to do this. The North Star is what is really the right investment for us and the right decision for this product to reach its full potential, right? For the most amount of people to have fun. So if that is our North principle, and for whatever reason, technical, creative, or other, we need to do a wipe, right? Because it's just necessary for us to hit that bigger vision, then we will figure out a way to do it in the way that's the least disruptive, but that's the decision we will make. It's really hard to sort of commit to these things in a vacuum without having the values that we kind of bring here in terms of how we want to do this. And I think that is the most important thing. And hopefully, there will be things we will do that people will not like. There will be things that we will do that maybe will affect certain people's save files and things like that. But it's all part of the process to really create something special. And hopefully, we build that trust with the community over time that even if people go, okay, why did they do it this way? They trust us that there's a lot of thinking behind it, and that there is a really good end goal, and they should trust us, right? They should give it a shot. Like we're hearing some people go, why did they do roguelite, right? Why are they mixing this? Like we thought this game, we thought, we put this game in a box, right? Yeah. People like to put experiences in a box. Why did you make it a roguelite? And it's like, try it. Tell us what you think. And when you try it, then it might make sense to you that this is a perfect. There's another thing that's coming, right? That we already kind of announced, farming, right? And a lot of people were very curious about resource collection, right? It's like, when we showed the trailer, I mean, we love to see people's reactions to every trailer we make, and we specifically put in the tree cutting, and the harvest, the fishing in the trailer, like as a quick cut, and you really see how people, watch the trailer, they go, "Oh, I get what this game is," and then you show them the cutting of trees and the fishing, and people go, "Oh, what is this game? Like I'm not getting this anymore," right? And I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to, this is your early question of, well, what is this game, and what are the inspirations you guys are drawing from? And it's really things that excite us, things that we think are really fun in video games. And let's try to put it together in one experience. And we think about this game as a platform, not as a particular copy of a particular other genre or a particular other game. But we're going to take all of these cool experiences that we like from other games, inspirations, ideas. We're going to put our own twist on it. We're going to put our own ideas in. We're going to iterate on it with the community for as long as it needs to be a really good product. And that's hopefully something that many people will enjoy and appreciate.
I think the thing that is really important to me is that because to me, like, I don't want to sound too negative. I have kind of like this thing that sometimes I say things that are taken as like, oh my God, I'm saying these negative things about other developers and so on. But if you look at the ARPG genre over the last 20 years or so on, I always had this feeling that it has become a little bit stale, that everybody is doing the same shit, right? Mm-hmm. And we are like, no, in order to really revitalize the genre, I think you have to be a risk taker, right? And a lot of these AAA companies can't afford to take risks, right? We are a smaller studio. We don't have, like these crazy costs that they have and so on. So we just feel like you have to be ready to kind of like open some wounds and take some risks and so on, right? Because otherwise you might never get to that next big step. And doing those things that we're doing, right? And I was pleasantly surprised that when I saw Grinding Gear with their Path of Exile update now doing house, like city building and all of those things, that's cool, right? I would also be really pleasantly surprised if we would see Diablo 5 having combat that is maybe a little bit closer to what we are doing instead of like point and click and so on. We'll see, right? But and the same thing is true for wipes, for example, and for all of those things, right? Because there are other approaches to this where we feel like, no, you just have to ask yourself the question of like, why has it been done this way in the first place, right? And is there a better way to do it? We have this plague system, for example, right, that is static right now, where as you progress through the world, the difficulty of the enemy scales, but it's static. And we have this thing where it's like, no, but it was designed as a dynamic system. So at some point we switch this on, and then the enemies progressively level with you and so on, and then you can pull that back again. And that's another way we might approach this, right? So I think that is really important, that we just don't look at it as like, hey, we'll do this because other people have done it, right? But to look at how can we revitalize the genre? How can we do really exciting things that haven't been done yet?
So I do want to bring up one of the things you did talk about grinding your games, and as a player, I'm a huge fan of wipes. I actually used to not be, but Path of Exile changed that a lot for me. So I wonder, how do you feel about the way where they do it, where it's not exactly a true wipe. Everything just moves to the standard realm, so you can continue your character if you want to, but the majority of the new stuff, you do want to make a new character. And for me as a player, that's really refreshing. Like every time I want to play like RimWorld or any game in general, it feels a little bit like continuing somebody else's save game if I haven't played for like 6 months or 4 months or whatever.
Yeah, obviously, like Chris Wilson and this entire Grinding Gear team, right? Like they're incredibly proficient now with Path of Exile and super talented, have done amazing job. Like honestly, if back then when Path of Exile released, right? If somebody would have said, "Oh, these guys compete against Diablo or Blizzard" back then, right? You would have laughed, right? And now they're like, "Oh shit, this is what they're doing now is on another level." I think they're smart. At the same time, again, like I'd like to look at things from the perspective of like, let's not really just entertain what have other people done, right? Because the one thing that I see with Path of Exile is how many people actually play the standard realms, right? After a new league is there and so on. That's what I would question there, right? And like just answering that question of like, or asking that question of like, why is it like this in the first place, right? Because the wipes are only there for like, to give you a fresh experience again, right? And I'm still like, there's these discussions that we had on like, can we do that in a different way as well, where we don't wipe you, and that's still to be
Well,
figured out.
sometimes there's technical reasons for that, right? Like sometimes you just have to do it from a
Sometimes
technical perspective. But creatively, I think there are wipes that could work well, and there are wipes that would just be a very, big inconvenience to the community, and we would try to avoid the latter.
Well, that's fair. So obviously with the roguelike dungeon right now being like the majority of the end game, how many different types of end games are you imagining that at least we'll have early on, and how big of a part of that will like the Crucible be?
I think it's all about merging it together. So there's like 3-4 components that we are thinking about right now, that we're doing right now. The Crucible is just one of those, right? And the Crucible right now is like, okay, so if I want to exalt my items and get these certain resources and so on, I go to the Crucible, right? But then there will be other things. I already mentioned the plague system. That's a major part of it, right? That there will be a certain point in the game where the pestilence actually breaks out, and then the game really changes. So that's another one, and there's multiple other things, right? For many people, for example, we have lots of Dark Souls fans in the studio as well.
Yeah.
For many people, the PvP that we have planned will be the end game, right? Because our PvP, like the PvP, typically in ERPGs is not great, right? Because it's really not suited for that kind of playstyle. But ours is really fucking fun, right? Because it's almost like a fighting game, right? And I came from having played back in the days, right, like Bomberman and those kind of things, with my family, right? And there's that as well, where I'd like to do things that are a little bit crazy in terms of PvP, where I even see things that Smash Brothers did that we could do, and just to create a really fun thing, right? Like ultimately, it's just about, how can we create hundreds of hours of fun for players and like not make the game ever get stale.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my follow-up. How much replayability are you aiming for versus, a lot of the Ori games are more about the storyline, right? Like there will be a lot of people that like finish Ori once and then they were like, I had a really great time, but they might not go back to it and play it for 1,000 hours.
I mean, that has been always a huge part of this project, right? Like with Ori, you always kind of like looked at, oh, we just spent 4 years in this, and now people have breezed through this thing in like 10 hours, right? And it was always like, Jesus Christ, like
we actually had a lot of ideas in Ori that actually now manifest themselves in this project because it just wasn't the right time for us to take that on. But I think if you ask me, I do think Ori has a few of those big opportunities that we could have taken that we decided not to, and it could have been made into a game that people could have replayed a lot more if we would have focused our effort there.
But that is obviously a huge thing. Like we want Wicked to be an extremely replayable game. Ultimately, once 1.0 hits and so on, right? Like we are working on a game that people could play forever, right? Be it like not in terms of just the content, right? At some point, you're going to run out of content, right? But in terms of, hey, I haven't played this build yet, or a build like that, or hey, I could approach this in a completely different way. That kind of thing. And then if we just keep it live, right? If we keep adding modes and other things to it, right? Like there's going to be so many different varieties of like how you could play Wicked that I think, like I want it to be the convenience game at some point for people, right? Where they just go, oh, this is my jam, right? This is what I play. I know it's fucking fun. I know what Moon Studios puts out is always super great, and really up my alley, right? That's basically what we're going for. So yeah, we literally went from games that people play for 10, 15 hours to hopefully people will ultimately spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours.
The answer is it will depend on the kind of player you are, but the idea is that we're creating a game that could appeal in different ways to different people, right? So if somebody's really into roguelites and that kind of experience, well, you can do that. If you're into PvP, you can do that. If you want to have a great world and story, which I'm also really passionate, about, especially world building a grounded world that makes sense, where everything connects, right? That is immersive, where you feel grounded in the world. I think that is part of the experience, right? And if you that's something that people sometimes also don't think about, is that if you think about things like combat feedback, right, or the feel of the combat system, the audio, the hit reactions of enemies, the blood effects. Now we've added, we call it rip and tear, right? We have the ability to basically blast enemies into pieces in all kinds of ways and cut them in half and all of that. And we'll continue improving that. You could think about this as like, okay, this is something that is replayable in a sense, because if the game feels better to play, if the weapons are just super nice to actually use, right? If everything feels grounded, then when you then multiply it by a good system that brings you back, it's a replayable activity. But now
Yeah.
you're in, the moment to moment is that much more enjoyable because you have this carrot on the stick that brings you back to do it more. But the moment to moment is really, really important. So I think it all kind of works together, right? Because you also want a break. If you play a game and it's the same kind of thing, even if you really love it, at some point you want to break from it, right? But here it's like, okay, if you're really into the combat, but then you want to just relax, you want to go into the town and pet some animals and build a town project and farm and do the crops and hear the beautiful violin play in the background and just relax for an hour from all of the slashing and destroying monsters, it's still the same game, right? You don't.
I think there's a really interesting psychological thing there, right? Like if you look at, for example, right, if you take it back to simpler times, right, like Zelda on the Super Nintendo, A Link to the Past or something, right? What I really always loved about those games is that it wasn't just 8 dungeons in a row, right? There was an overworld, and you went through the overworld, got some item that allowed you to get access to the dungeon. In the dungeon, you found some item, and now that item in the dungeon actually allowed you to get to whole new places in the overworld, right? So there was this really nice interplay between these systems, right? And that's kind of like what we're trying to do with our stuff as well, right? Where it's like, hey, there's the overworld there, and psychologically, it was just really cool, right? That you didn't have, oh, I need to do a dungeon, and now I need to do another dungeon, and then another dungeon, and then another dungeon, right? Because you're just, at some point, you put the controller away because it's just too much at once, right? So you want to have these moments where it's just, oh, I can just chill in the overworld and like explore all the stuff and get these items, right? And then at some point, you're ready again. Like, now I want to do this dungeon because I can't wait to see what I'm getting next, right? So that's the thing that we're doing here as well, right? Where it's like, hey, I run the overworld and I get some stuff and I loot some things, right? And then now I want to do a Crucible run and get some other stuff. Or your friends suddenly come online and you're like, hey, we haven't done this thing together recently, and so on. So that's the idea.
Yeah.
Even with Ori, we did that, right? With Ori, when we designed the world, it was like, hey, here's a platforming room, and then here's a combat room, and then here's a puzzle room, and now it's about story, and da-da-da. It was never, here's a platforming room, followed by a platforming room, followed by a platforming room, etc., because you get bored, right?
Yeah.
And that's the really cool thing about Wicked, right? That we can literally throw all this stuff at you so that for every player, there's something there, right? So if you're not in the mood of X right now, well, you can do Y. And that's, again, like, I think with a lot of ARPGs, it's always like, here's a quest, go kill some monsters, right? Then you go kill monsters. And then here's another quest, go kill some monsters, right? And it's just at some point, okay, well, here's I guess the next quest will be about go kill some monsters, right?
Yeah.
And we'd like to bring some
It
more
changes a
variety
lot.
into this so that it's like, you can always do a variety of things. That's the idea.
Now, I think I was noticing for myself when doing the Crucible, and this was consistent between last time and this time a little bit, although less the last time. But I found myself running out of resources like food and stuff. Like, is that intended that you want people to like, okay, now I ran out of food, I can't do Crucible anymore, I need to go farm the world?
Yes,
Or
Thomas, what do you think about that problem of running out of food in the Crucible? Let's see.
So the things is that you haven't seen yet, right, is that the Seneschal, when you upgrade him, one of the things that he offers you is that you can actually heal in the Crucible. So
Right.
you can heal against the orbs, the traces that you get, right? So there is that option for you, right? So you can make your life easier if you come in with a bunch of food. But if you don't want to play that way, if you just don't have food right now and you already unlocked that, well, you can also play that way. But there's a little bit of a cost to pay.
Okay. That explains a lot. Yeah. Very cool. The next topic. Oh, actually, I did want to ask you about anything. I don't know if you can even answer this, but have you guys, well, I assuming you have, discussed a lot, how long do you plan to be in early access? Is it going to be like, a year or two, or do you want to stay in early access for like quite a while and like really iron everything out?
I think
I don't know if
we don't want to stay too long, and we want to iron everything out. So I don't think we want to be
Yes.
going for way too long, because at a certain point, I think artists need constraints, right? And we know this, we live this every day. At some point, you need to have a goal, and you just try to figure it out. Otherwise, it can take just a very long time. So we're not ready to share exactly the number of months we would be in early access, but yeah, we try to keep it on the short end.
Okay, cool. So like, for example, it would probably be less than 2 years from now then. Right. Cool. Cool.
When it's done.
When it's done.
There you go. See, that's the
when
tension.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's already fun, but
yeah,
it would probably be in that somewhere in that area.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So monetization is a big topic in games, and especially lately,
No.
I feel like that. No, it is. It's a very big topic, and I do feel
Yeah,
like.
but no is the answer to your question.
Oh, okay. So there's never going to be any pay to win or anything at all.
We don't have that planned. Yeah, we don't have that crazy thing. Like I made fun on Twitter about the whole whatever $50 horse or something, right? I think I'd look like a fucking idiot if we now have a $50 horse in the game. So
Yeah.
it's not planned. Like we think there should be different ways to monetize games, right? Instead of just nickel and diming players. Like that feeling of like, oh, I go into the game and they sell me stuff, right? It should just be, no, I go into the game because I want to have fun, right? So that's the idea.
Awesome. So does that mean that, like, do you think you'll have anything like a paid expansion instead then? So like there'll be like a huge like DLC.
Yes.
But yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah,
Cool.
we think that's the fairer approach for players, right? So that they know, hey, these guys have put a ton of work into this, right? There's a whole new area or a whole new areas and all new stuff, right? And so at some point after 1.0, yes, we plan for a kind of like an expansion model where we just say, look, obviously we have to pay our developers as well and so on, right? And that makes sense. I think that's pretty fair. But the whole, hey, we rely on whales to finance the game, I think is pretty problematic and leads you onto a pretty shitty road.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big things I kind of champion on my stream. I like really hate the monetization in a lot of games now, so it's very refreshing to hear. It's like there's at some point you get very tilted when you keep getting like pop-up notifications like, hey, buy our new stuff, and it's like, I just want to play the game. Like
it just creates all these problems, even from a designer's perspective and from a developer's perspective in general, right? This whole, hey, we have this really cool thing that we did, right? But you're never going to see it unless you pay for it, right? And it's like, well, really now I'm playing the game just to get an opportunity to buy something versus, I have to do this really cool challenge to get this really cool loot, right? And that
I think for me it goes far deeper than that, right? For me, it's just immersion breaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's you want to play a game to escape, right? To disconnect, to be somewhere else, to be in a different place, to kind of have your brain focus on something else. And when it kind of breaks that wall of like, oh, give me money, even if it's a virtual currency or whatever, it feels all the same. It kind of breaks that experience for you, right? Because you're no longer in this other world. You're now connecting my world and my financial situation, right, which sometimes I want to escape from, with this game. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose. And there should be a good way of, creating a financial upside if you're making a high quality product without having to, kind of be needy, right? And be like, hey, pay, right? Like, hey, we need you to buy this, we need you to buy that. Sometimes developers need support, and there's nothing wrong with that. If they need that, they need that. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's art. Video games should be art. And if people like it, well, they will come and they will spend the money to buy the game. At that point, it's the game.
I just also have to think about kind of like the 12, 13-year-old Thomas, right? Like I didn't have that much money for games back then. And if I imagine the situation that we have right now, where it's like, oh, if I want this really cool item, I have to pay $15 or something. That's fucking bullshit. Like that's just.
I love hearing this.
It's really weird.
For me, it's I have a personal story for that too. I grew up with. I still remember the feeling of holding that disc of Dungeon Keeper, the first Dungeon Keeper,
game.
right? Yeah, and the first moment of being able to possess a creature, and then it's like, oh, and I can experience everything from a first person view. Like, what the fuck? This is amazing. This is great. Then I did Dungeon Keeper 2. Whatever you think, that was still very fun and very addictive. And then there was this other Dungeon Keeper that I pretend never happened.
Yep, same.
Where I then
the phone thing.
I then needed to go, and I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to try that. Of course, I grew up with Dungeon Keeper. I love that game. And then it was like, hey, so you're gonna have to break this rock, and it's gonna take you just like an insane amount of hits, which is just makes absolutely no sense. But you can buy this X, and it's gonna be much faster. And I was like, I'm done. I closed that game and I never went back. I'm still
Yeah.
playing Dungeon Keeper 1 and 2 once in a while, and those are the only Dungeon Keepers that exist for me. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I think the industry in general, though, is heading a little bit in a different direction, right? Like the whole microtransaction thing, I think that has kind of like ran its course, except for maybe like the EA stuff. But I think there's probably going to be different ways to monetize. But I think the AAA industry, I think in general, is like, you know, if you have 1,500 people on a game, right? Like, yes, you do need to somehow feed those people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, players will decide and will vote with their
100%.
wallets, right? I don't know if they vote, you know, for, yeah, I want to feed your 1,500 people constantly by flashing my credit card.
I do feel sadly that it is getting worse, not better, especially with the like latest edition of like the like I'm calling it peasant launch, but it's like, oh, we have our actual launch, but then you can start playing 3 days earlier to get a head start for like $30. Like that's my least favorite addition to gaming. But it's been very refreshing to hear you talk about it. And I actually I want to ask you about the city building and stuff. And this is really interesting to me because time gating in games, what I feel like was in a lot of games introduced as a feature, like you said, to get people to pay for it, right? And we have that in very many like mobile games where it's like, this is going to be 16 hours to build, or you can pay $3 to do it instantaneously. And it's really interesting to me that you guys don't have any way to speed it up for money, and neither does Path of Exile, but you've both gone with time gating. And that's not a feature that everybody loves. So I would love to hear you guys talk a little bit about.
I love this question. This is a great question.
I know there's a lot of people, like, this is a very controversial thing, right? And as you can imagine in the team as well, right? There's a lot of people go, oh my God, this is now a timer, what the fuck, right?
Yeah, I specifically want you to answer. What is the benefit, in your opinion?
Ultimately, again, like we have to build all this stuff with what's to come, right? Not just, hey, here's based on what you're playing right now, right? But also what's to come. And ultimately, my goal is that we fuse all those things together, that you always have a believable world, right? That it's not just every single time the player wants something, click and you got it, right? Because I think that's what got us into that situation of, hey, these ARPGs were really fun, and now it's just everything explodes on screen at once, huge numbers, right? Like big dick damage, and you know everything all at once. There's this wild saying that I think is very true, right? Like that if given the chance, players will optimize the fun out of any game, right?
That is true.
And I think what happens a lot right now is that developers just listen probably too much to the community. Like we want all the feedback that we can get, right? And want people to tell us, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do this and that and so on? But ultimately, we're the directors of the game, right? We're the designers. We have to make sure that, you know, we feed you with stuff, we give you stuff that is just super fucking fun, right? And sometimes you might say, but I don't like these fucking green peas, right? But if we can make them fucking delicious, you might like them, right? So it's just, to me, the big thing is building a believable world. And you will see that with the multiplayer as well, and with the way we'll do Day of Time stuff and so on, that Sacrament and the whole of Isola Sacra should always just feel like, oh, I'm popping into this world and something crazy is going on, etc. Right? And that whole time thing, to me, plays a big part of that. I don't think we have really achieved that yet. Right now, it's just here's a timer, right? But ultimately, I think this is for the better of the game. I think there's a good reason why Grinding Gear did the same thing, right? Like they probably have a very similar idea of like, we want to build a really believable thing, and we want to do a lot with time because time is value.
Yeah, and I think it's just really something that you look forward to, right? That there's this delayed gratification, and you're really kind of investing into something that will come into fruition in the future. And I think that is a very rewarding concept. I do think that, you know, as Thomas is saying, we have this big debate in the team about this as well, but I don't think we have so much a debate about whether or not we should do timers, right? Because I think the concept is obviously, you know, useful, and delayed gratification is very, very powerful. The problem is, why don't people get it yet, right? Or why don't people enjoy it yet? So this is where, when you look at feedback from the community, right, you shouldn't just say, well, there's a you know, Steam comment that says, kill timers, and it has 1,000 upvotes, and you just go in there and you go like, okay, I guess people don't like timers, right? Then you just kill them. But I think a lot of the times, as a designer and as a somebody that tries to lead this product through a process here, you have to look at the feedback, and then you have to look at it holistically, and then ask the question, why do people feel that way, right? Because it might not be that they don't want the timers. It might be that they don't want the timers the way they are in right now. And then you could be like, okay,
I think that's I think that's a general thing right now, right? Because we've seen like the internet has changed the thinking a lot, like psychologically for everybody, right? Because look at TV shows back then, right? Like I loved, for example, when Game of Thrones was still good, right? How everybody was like, oh my God, did you see that episode, right? And then for a week you had to speculate, right? Oh my God, well, what will happen in the next one and so on. And I would argue that is really valuable. That's really cool that people have to speculate, that they don't know yet what's going to happen, right? That you actually, that time, right? Like the time is a thing, right? Whereas if you just have, okay, here's a full season, you can binge watch it, right? And a lot of people do it in the first day, right?
Yeah.
And then, well, the fun is over, right? Like there's nothing to speculate and so on. I think that is really interesting, especially if we do time also with story and with all those things, right? Like I think there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do there. You see it also with like how that can change the way players play. Like let's take hardcore mode, for example, right? You do hardcore, you make permadeath a thing, right? And suddenly you play the game very differently than you do if you can just spam heals all the time, right? So I think there's a lot like to come there in terms of like how we make the timers really interesting.
It's complicated, right? Because I was kind of keeping an eye on the chat here, and I think the people have a really fair point that maybe for a lot of people, timers are connected to microtransactions, right? So they automatically associated with this negative emotion that they might have towards that. And I think that you have to also think about world building, right? So for instance, I would probably assume that a lot of people, and this is the argument that I'm sort of telling myself whenever we have this discussion about timers, I can think of one mechanic where timers make perfect sense, but you don't think about them as timers, and that is farming, right? So when you plant your crops and you need to give this investment that you have just made, you bought a plot of land, you've harvested these materials that you can now plant in the ground, then you need to water it, you need to do all of that thing, and then it's going to produce results over time, right? You don't expect that you would water it and it's like bam, immediately everything, all the crops grow. But I feel like a lot of people would accept that, but they don't accept that when it comes to a building project, which is like, well, what did you expect? That Danos is going to build it over, over 1 second? Like that is
and
also
you click it and it's right? It's just there's something fun to me, right? Like when you think back about being a kid and like that wait for Christmas, right? Was like was exciting, right? Like every day was like, oh my God, I can't wait for Christmas, right? Like that kind of thing. I think time is just generally a really powerful concept. And again, like I don't think we are there yet, but there's lots of really interesting ideas.
Well, I have 2 more questions, and the first one is a question for both of you. So we'll start with Thomas. I want you to list one thing that you think No Rest for the Wicked does really well, and your least favorite thing that the game needs to work on.
Can I give you 10?
No, you only get to pick one.
I would say generally the feel of the game, right? Because if I played all these ARPGs recently, top-down ARPGs, to me they all feel very similar to play. And I like that Wicked feels distinctively different, right? That it's just, okay, this is a different beast. Different. The combat feels very different and so on. That kind of thing. I mean, there's so much that we still want to improve on that is on the roadmap, right?
You get to pick one.
My biggest thing would probably, I would agree with the community that I would really want to see multiplayer finally, like live, right? So that everybody can play it and so on. Because like lots of the multiplayer stuff that we've been thinking about is
something you have to release. So what do you want to fix about the game? I'm not gonna let you
Can't weasel you out of this one.
Fix about it. Well, it's all stuff that I wanna, that I wanna add to it. I'd like to see way more bosses, right? That kind of thing. Fix is hard. I don't know. I don't think that way. Like whenever I think of have to fix something, then it's just, to me, it goes into the list of, well, things that we still have to do.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. What about you?
Do I get to give you two downsides now because Thomas gave you zero?
Okay, yeah, go for it. Yep, yep.
That's easy. Things that we do really well. I mean, there's I think a lot of things to be really happy about before we talk about the improvements. But I personally, if what I really like and what we're really pushing the team all the time is to create a world, to create something that is immersive, right? So all of the different components of the experience have to come together. So it's the writing, it's it's how you design the game so it feels grounded. It's how the controller feels, it's the visual effects, it's the audio, it's the IK on the feet of the character, it's the way animation blending works. It's all of these different elements and just creating something that feels grounded and immersive, that has weight to it, right? So it doesn't feel like it's this subtle thing of feeling connected to the experience, the character that you see on the other side. Because I think video games a lot of times could be disconnected. It's like it's a video game, right? Like you just subconsciously don't really perceive it a certain way. But I think we've been able, at least for me, we've been able to do something that feels grounded and immersive, and you really connect with that world. You feel the weight of being in that world and the weight of that combat. And I really like that. I think that is something that's very difficult to do and something that
That's
is,
very nice.
put your finger at because it's not one individual component. It's, graded in some of its parts kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the things that we could improve, I think there was really a lot, but I would just really like to see our fading system get a pass on it because the way the world, it's so beautiful and it's so, the style is so unique. But then you have these like, oh, and now everything fades, and you have this like half of this tree fades, and it
Oh,
also
right.
feels very
Yeah.
techy. It feels very, it doesn't have the finesse that the art style has yet. So the technical component, the technical aspect of how we do occlusion, which by the way comes from our camera system, right? So like it's very, very difficult to do that, in an isometric perspective because you constantly have these objects, but we now also have verticality in this game that you generally don't have in other games. And then everything starts to occlude, right? Like you sometimes have this big pillar and it's in front of your character, and it's like, what do you do and how do you do it in a way that is really organic and really clean, right? Something that fits into this bigger, art style. So I think that's the thing that annoys me every single time. And maybe the other thing that I would probably like to see, and maybe Thomas is, he will agree with that, is that I think
No.
that there is more we can do with the world still. Like I think that we are just getting started with side quests and additional NPCs, and it's like I would just like to really be lost in the world in terms of, well, if I venture out, maybe I can meet someone, right? And they
No,
have
I
their
100% agree on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
So I
this
mean,
is something
that is
we're still gonna do a lot of.
like
Very
in
cool.
general, like I agree with that, right? Like in general, I think there's a lot of story stuff to come that is really important to us. If you saw that with the Ori games, like one of the reasons why your wife is probably a fan of the Ori games is A, because they look pretty, right? But also there was a deep, meaningful message in all of them, right?
Yep.
They had this fantasy style, right, and looked a little bit like kids games, right? But then they dealt with very serious human topics and so on. I think a lot of times right now in these kind of games, especially, it's very just fantastical, right? Like, oh, big demon spawns, big demon kills the world. You have to stop big demon, right? And I would like to have stuff in there where it's like, no, you really connect with these characters. Who are all these vendors and people there? And then to give them character, like, and lots of situations, right, where you really feel for them and understand the troubles that they're going through and all of this stuff. Like, why are they in the situation that they're in, right? And to see character arcs fully played out over the course of all of this, right? Like, I would like to do something where that it's a full huge thing, right? Like that
Yeah.
it's a full epic, right? Where at the end of it, all the character arcs are done, right? And you understand exactly where all these characters went and what they went through and so on. I think that's a huge thing. And I think that, like, sadly, some of the story stuff we had to sacrifice just to ship early access and so on. But that is extremely important to us, that we now will finally be able to tell those stories where people really will
Yeah.
start cry again, right? Or like really connect with these characters that they interact with.
Very cool. Very cool. As a final question, what should we be the most excited for that is on the horizon?
I think a lot. Like it's pretty fucking crazy, all the stuff that we have planned, right? I think the multiplayer is something that people will be really excited about. And it depends on the player, right? I think a lot of players will be excited about big Sacrament update that we have planned. I think other people will be very excited about the PvP and the way we do it and so on, because that will also be its very own unique thing. Just the world expansion, right? The Marine Woods and the Lowland Meadows and so on are the next bigger areas that we are introducing. There's a lot upcoming, which just, hey, we hope we make a really big dent in the genre. So yeah, that's a lot.
Very,
The point
very
is,
excited.
we've been building this foundation for 7 years, and we've just started, sort of firing all of those bullets that we've been developing for a long time. And we're learning a lot. And I think the most exciting thing for us, it's hard to pick maybe necessarily one specific update, or, obviously we could say, well, 1.0, right? Like that's when it's going to go big, right? And we'll have all the content we plan for that. But I think it's the journey, right? It's important for us to also enjoy the process of making video games, the process of making video games with the community, and being able to be vulnerable, being able to try things, be audacious, take some risks, try things that maybe other people wouldn't try, fail a few times, maybe do things that don't work, correct from there, and dial everything in to create this experience that we always wanted to play when we were growing up, with these games like Diablo 2. And we were kind of thinking, where could this genre go next? What kind of game would I be playing in 20 years from now, right? And here we are, 20 years from now, and we're still not playing that game. And I think
I think in general, like the thing that amazes me is just the amount of stuff that we can still do. As Gennadiy said, right? Like we have a really great foundation now. And if you look at, for example, what we did with the roguelite update now, right? With the Crucible. Again, like that's just the start for us, right? Like, and we just took it from it basically took a month for us to do this now. Because there was a whole bunch of other stuff that we did. Then we focused on the Crucible, and we're like, okay, we'll do this in a big way now. And ultimately, I think the kick that people get from roguelite games, that kick I would like to get them just from playing the Crucible, right?
Yeah.
And that just means, well, we have to support it with more content and so on. But then also just using that foundation, right? That we already have, really cool levels, that you can actually have this verticality in the levels, that you could do multiplayer in a roguelite fashion, right?
Yeah.
We even I don't know if we should tease this already, right? But one of the statues, right? We want to do even like a survivor type thing and so on.
Cool.
And just go crazy with that, right? Simply because, well, the foundation is already there. All the things have been laid out. Our combat system is there. All the stat stuff is there and so on.
That sounds cool.
And we just really have to take it to the finish line, right? And just say, right? There's all this crazy shit in there. It's going to be cool.
That's the cool thing, where all of these experiences, they're going to start connecting, right? So it's not going to be just about a particular mode or a particular thing that's in the game, but it's how all of this plays together, right? So, you can think about like, hey, we're doing a roguelite mode, and it's really cool. Or we're doing a survivor mode that Thomas, just mentioned, and it's really cool. But now we can do it in multiplayer. Then like, oh, whoa, that is pretty cool. Like this is not something you have experienced before to that degree, right? And I think it's going to be this, the process of connecting all of these dots, and then for the gamer, when they experience this game, to actually see that it all connects, right? That it all makes sense, and now I can engage with this. And then, oh, if I'm in the Crucible and I run out of food, okay, I want to do more Crucible, so I have to go back into town, and maybe I do some farming, or maybe I'll go and venture in the overworld, I'll collect some materials, or maybe I'll upgrade some projects because I want to make more food. And, it all starts to, all of these different modes, they start talking to each other, they start feeding into one another. And I think that's also a very, very, that's another layer of complexity that I think the only way to get it right is to just release the game, try it out, see how people play it, get the feedback, iterate, really understand the feedback on a deep level, understand why things aren't working, don't take feedback at face value, then do those deep, changes, iterate again, try again until it really starts coming together. And I'm seeing that there are actually quite good questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to spend a few moments, maybe, if we have that still. But I mean, there's a very very good question that I think I just saw here. Let me bring this up. People are asking if we're going to do more NPCs in general, like Finley and things like that. And the answer is yeah, absolutely. There's going to be a big update that's going to come At some point in the future, we will do the big roadmap update, but there will be a lot more NPCs and projects in Sacrament.
Okay. Very cool. Well, I mean, I'm really, really like
That
happy
Zelda
with...
thing. So I just wanted to say that real quick, right? Like what Gennadiy said with the whole like all the dots connect, right? That goes back to that Zelda thing, right? Where it's like it was done on a simpler level because games back then were simpler, right? But if you now explode it out, right, and it's just, oh, but I could do this,
Yeah.
and then you go and oh, but now I try this. Oh my God, this other thing is done now, and now I could do this, and then oh, I could do this, right? Like it's just really gonna be super addictive and fun. I think once all the stuff connects.
It is always
That's really
super
exciting.
good when you're just always feeling like you have one more thing to do, one more thing to work on
Yes.
and stuff. Absolutely.
Yep.
This is like,
Yeah, when you just
such
don't
a
want to
refreshing
shut the fucking
interview.
game off and it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
it's 5 a.m. already, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is the best feeling when you're like, oh, I'll play one more game, right? I'll do one more thing, and suddenly it's 5 a.m. Absolutely the best feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
One more run.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for taking time to do this interview. This was like super refreshing, very like brutally honest about everything, and just really, really nice to hear. So huge thank you to both of you, and congratulations on No Rest for the Wicked so far. It looks amazing. I've been having a blast playing it, so really good job.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having us, and I think you should do more of those Zizaruns of the Crucible. Now.
I will. All right. Thank you so
And
much.
get your damage up, man.
Well, I'll try. Okay, I'll try. Okay. Well, hopefully, even we can do more of these talks after like future updates as well. That would be super cool if you guys are done for it. I really enjoyed it, so hopefully I'll see you back here in not too long.
Of course.
Absolutely. Whenever you want to have an interview or something, right? We're always here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining,
Cool.
and I'll see you guys soon.
See
Thanks for
you.
having
Bye-bye.
Bye.